In our material, we have thoroughly exposed and refuted the position and writings of false traditionalists. This video will cover some of the most important and revealing facts about Michael Matt, the false traditionalist editor of The Remnant. These points will demonstrate to any person who wants the truth that Matt is, sadly, a heretic and an apostate. We hope for his conversion, but the following facts prove that he is a faithless tool used by the devil to keep people in a false resistance. Michael Matt has promoted the heresy that Jews who observe the old law and don't believe in Jesus Christ can be saved. Michael Matt has described Michael Davies as one of the greatest defenders of the Catholic faith of all time. He has also published Michael Davies' heretical writings. Davies repeatedly denied the dogma outside the Catholic Church there is no salvation. In 2001, Michael Matt published Michael Davies' heretical assertion that Jews who reject Jesus Christ and observe the old law can be saved, a heresy directly contrary to the teaching of the Council of Florence. Michael Davies' The Remnant, September 15, 2001, quote, Jews who are convinced that the Old Covenant still prevails and are perfectly sincere and conscientious in their observance of the Jewish law can be saved, end quote. This is a blatant heresy that directly denies the solemn teaching of the Council of Florence, which declared that all who die as Jews or observe the old law go to hell. In fact, Davies' heretical statement that people can observe the old law and be saved was basically word for word the opposite of what is declared in the Bull Cantate Domino. It's as if the devil himself authored Davies' heretical statement. The Catholic Church repeatedly and dogmatically teaches that all who die as Jews and non-Catholics are not saved. That is what true Catholics believe and profess. That's why it's necessary for non-Catholics to be converted. Matt's publication and endorsement of Davies' clear heresy proves that he, like Davies, is a heretic who does not profess the true faith. Michael Matt holds that the idolater John Paul II was a saint. Matt holds that the notorious idolater and proponent of false ecumenism, Anti-Pope John Paul II, is a saint. Matt has referred to John Paul II as a saint various times in public since the 2014, quote, canonization.
Saint John Paul.
Saint John Paul.
I'm not questioning his personal holiness.
This proves that Matt is an apostate and indeed an idolater, for he is aware that John Paul II notoriously promoted false ecumenism for decades, organized the idolatrous Assisi prayer meetings, agreed with the Lutherans on justification, and much more. Anti-Pope John Paul II also presided over the worst sex scandal in church history, taught universal salvation, rejected converting Protestants, etc. One could go on for hours exposing his heresies and mortal sins. As we explain in The Antichrist Revealed, the beast that was and is not has returned. To profess that John Paul II is a saint in the face of the aforementioned facts, for example the idolatrous Assisi events, is to profess belief in false gods. It is to profess that one can be sanctified or made holy by serving false gods and promoting their cults, as Anti-Pope John Paul II did. Matt's capitulation to the false position that the apostate Anti-Pope John Paul II was a saint is just one example of how he is a faithless tool of Satan used to mislead people who claim to be traditional Catholics. By professing that the idolater John Paul II was a saint, he commits mortal sin and leads others into the same mortally sinful rejection of God and the Catholic faith. Michael Matt holds that the idolater and religious indifferentist Mother Teresa was a saint. In an article and video published by Matt's organization in 2016, Mother Teresa was described as saintly, holy, and courageous. This is demonic. As we document in great detail in our video why Mother Teresa was not a saint, Mother Teresa was a notorious heretic and a non-Christian. She was not remotely Catholic. She was a proponent of complete religious indifferentism. She rejected converting people to Catholicism. She considered the false gods of Hindus and other non-Christians to be the same as the true God. She endorsed paganism. She directly participated in idolatrous rites and mortally sinful false worship. She utterly denied the necessity of Jesus Christ and Catholicism, and much more. Matt holds that you can do all of that and still go to heaven, indeed become a, quote, saint. He is an apostate, and his claims to be faithful to Catholic teaching are totally false. Michael Matt holds that Mother Angelica was a true Catholic and a, quote, radical traditionalist. In our video, The Deception of Mother Angelica and EWTN, we document that Mother Angelica, the foundress of EWTN, was sadly a notorious heretic. She was a proponent of false ecumenism and some of the worst heresies of the Vatican II sect. She called a mortally sinful Jewish service in St. Patrick's Cathedral awesome. She praised abominable Islamic false worship, and she called the defined dogma outside the Catholic Church there is no salvation a heresy, to name just a few of her rejections of Catholic teaching.
There was a heresy at one time that you had to be Catholic, otherwise you didn't go to heaven. That's not what the Church teaches. All people are saved by the merits of Jesus, the grace in the church. But they don't have to be Catholic. We hope they're all Catholic. But many people are of different religions, no religion.
She promoted the horrible false ecumenism of anti-Pope John Paul II, including demonic interfaith events that are specifically condemned by the Catholic Church. She fully accepted the new Mass and enabled hordes of modernists on her network to teach heresies to the world, such as the heresy that Protestants are Christians on the road to salvation. As an example, consider EWTN's show The Journey Home. During Mother Angelica's leadership, EWTN consistently presented Protestantism as a salvific form of Christianity whose adherents belonged to Christ's body, when that is not true. Under Mother Angelica, EWTN taught that it's not necessary for Protestants to convert to Catholicism to be saved, even though Catholicism contains, quote, the full truth. She was a demonic false prophet and a notorious heretic who promoted the false Vatican II religion. Nevertheless, the apostate Michael Matt described Mother Angelica as a, quote, rad trad, that is, a radical traditional Catholic who, quote, possessed the courage to stand against assaults on the church coming from within the church. He also said, I fear we shall not again see mainstream Catholic television activists who are actually Catholics such as Mother Angelica for a long, long time. Here was a woman who wasn't afraid to speak the truth no matter the costs, end quote. So according to Michael Matt, you can fully accept false ecumenism, interfaith worship condemned by Pope Pius XI, all the heresies of Vatican II, the new Mass, the heresy that Protestants are in the church and can be saved, etc., and be a, quote, radical traditionalist. That is a lie. It is not true. Matt is a heretic, not a traditional Catholic. Michael Matt called former Lakers player Kobe Bryant a, quote, practicing Catholic. Bryant is actually a notorious apostate who likes Harry Potter and acts as a pro-LGBTQ activist. In an article called Kobe Bryant Practicing Catholic, April 15, 2016, Michael Matt described former Lakers player Kobe Bryant in the following way, quote, in retirement as of this year, one of the greatest basketball players of all time is a happily married practicing Catholic. A living legend in a world that practices a form of sports idolatry. It's no wonder this kid fell a few times and fell hard, end quote. This was apparently Matt's attempt to demonstrate that the Vatican II sect is still operating with success and impact in the world, to the point of getting even famous people and celebrities to, quote, practice the faith. However, this only reveals that allegiance to the Vatican II anti-popes leads people such as Matt to wrongly conflate apostasy with practicing Catholicism. We of course hope for Kobe Bryant's conversion. In fact, when I was in high school, I worked at the same basketball camp as Bryant, and our high school basketball team, of which I was a member, played his high school team. Despite claiming on some level to be Catholic, Bryant is certainly not a Catholic. He is a wicked apostate. Among other things, Bryant is an aggressive proponent of the demonic, quote, LGBTQ agenda. He also likes the fictional wizard Harry Potter and has a habit of taking Jesus Christ's name in vain publicly. In fact, among the extremely famous athletes, Bryant might be one of the most pro-homosexual of them all. He recorded a public service announcement for the anti-Christian pro-homosexual organization GLAAD, in which he called for acceptance of people of other religions and sexual orientations.
There are all kinds of different people in the world. That's what makes the world special. So whether someone is different than you, in race, ethnicity, political beliefs, religion, or sexual orientation, words can be hurtful. Replace them with understanding, compassion, and acceptance.
Bryant came out publicly in support of Irving, quote, Magic Johnson after Johnson backed his own openly homosexual son. And when Jason Collins became the first openly homosexual NBA player, Bryant was one of Collins' most prominent and vocal supporters.
Kobe, what are your thoughts on Jason Collins?
I think it's fantastic. I think it's great. For him to be able to come out and have the courage to do so, I think it sets a great example. Pretty impressive. So somebody's got to be the one that steps up to the front and kind of takes the leadership on that. I'm glad he did.
In response to people who condemn homosexuality, which of course includes all who adhere to Catholic and biblical morality, Bryant also said, quote, what I can't tolerate is a lack of tolerance, end quote. Bryant can't tolerate the condemnation of homosexuality that is found in Catholic doctrine and the Bible. Bryant granted his first post-retirement interview to the notorious lesbian degenerate Ellen DeGeneres and played a friendly prank on her. Apparently the two LGBTQ activists are good friends. Concerning the militantly homosexual lesbian soccer, quote, star Abby Wambach, an openly practicing lesbian, Bryant tweeted, quote, thank you, Abby Wambach, for all that you are, have been, and will be. You are a true muse, end quote. When Bruce Jenner decided that he would pretend to be a female, dress as a woman, and call himself Caitlyn, Bryant came out in support. Obviously, he rejects the teaching of the Catholic Church and the Bible, which totally condemns such an abomination. Deuteronomy 22:5, quote, "A woman shall not be clothed with man's apparel, neither shall a man use women's apparel. For he who does these things is abominable before God," end quote. One could go on exposing Bryant's wickedness and anti-Christian agenda. Yet the apostate member of the Vatican II sect, Michael Matt, presents this disgraceful pro-sodomy activist, Kobe Bryant, as if he is a practicing Catholic, and someone who exemplifies the good fruit of forgiveness that he believes is still available for adherents of the mainstream Vatican II Church. This is another prime example of how far false traditionalists such as Matt are from a correct presentation of the Catholic faith. Some might respond by saying that Matt might not know how bad Bryant is, but that's precisely the point. Matt doesn't care enough about God and the Catholic faith to find out first. He isn't solicitous for God's law and Catholic truth, and such a person has no business trying to direct people on these matters or act as a spokesman for traditional Catholics. The results have been and will be disastrous. Another example of this is how Matt publishes heretical writings which teach that the offense of heresy in the external forum for a person who claims to be Catholic cannot possibly be committed until that person is declared a heretic. That is theological nonsense directly contrary to the teaching of the Church. Yet Matt publishes it, while at the same time he goes out in public and contradicts it by denouncing various people in the Vatican II Church as heretics, even though they have not been declared as such.
Many of them, Chris, I don't believe they're Catholic. Like you say, I don't even know what Supich is. He doesn't seem to be a Catholic to me. He's an Arian. And the idea is to follow what St. Athanasius does back in the 4th century. He recognizes that they're heretics. In the old days, a Nancy Pelosi, I hate to beat up on old Nancy, but she's not a Catholic. She's not a liberal Catholic. She's no longer a Catholic. She's an apostate.
That's an example of how Matt isn't even aware of or doesn't care about what he's publishing and whether he is consistent with it. Because, as we're showing, he isn't solicitous for God's law and Catholic truth. Moreover, since Matt wrongly considers the pagan anti-Pope Francis to be the Pope, and wrongly considers his apostate so-called bishops to be the Catholic hierarchy, he likewise wrongly considers those who adhere to the Vatican II religion, under the quote diocesan structure, to be practicing Catholics. Therefore, his false claim that the pro-LGBTQ apostate Kobe Bryant is a practicing Catholic is simply the byproduct of his other mistake, namely, of obstinately considering the non-Christian pagan anti-Pope Francis to be a valid pope. Kobe Bryant shows us again that in the Whore of Babylon, that is the Vatican II sect, the End Times Counterchurch, which also claims Michael Matt as its member, being a, quote, Catholic means absolutely nothing. Michael Matt says that the apostate universalist, quote, Bishop Robert Barron is not a bad guy. Robert Barron is the Novus Ordo Auxiliary, quote, Bishop of Los Angeles. He denies the existence of Adam and Eve and holds that hell may be empty.
Are any human beings in hell? We don't know.
He is a notorious heretic and an apostate. In a video, Michael Matt discussed Barron's recent interview with an open homosexual who lives in a sodomite, quote, marriage. Even though Barron made some good points and said some true things in other parts of the interview, his statements on the topics of sexual morality and gay, quote, marriage, his appeal to the false gospel of anti-Pope Francis, and other things, were appalling. They further reveal that he is sadly an apostate who doesn't have the true faith. Barron was asked about masturbation and pornography. In response, he did not even once say that they are mortal sins that put a person in a state of damnation. This is a clear failing on his part. He even described the mortal sin of masturbation as an inadequate expression of sexuality. That is a terribly misleading message.
So you mentioned porn. I have watched porn, obviously. I think probably everyone has watched porn. I think almost everyone that's watched porn would probably say they've watched too much porn. But what's your basic take on... Again, it's a legal act. So again, we're in that place of that something can be legal and maybe frowned upon by the church. How do you frame that whole?
I think actually I mentioned about masturbation, not porn, but because masturbation would be a good example of.
I guess those things are connected.
They're connected. But let's say so in the church's teaching, indeed, masturbation is seen as an inadequate, incomplete expression of human sexuality. Do I recommend, therefore, let's legislate against it and send the police after people? No, because obviously there'd be such a huge social negative impact from that the Aquinas principle would clearly hold. Now, porn, I suppose we could have an argument about that. I've been impressed by some of these recent studies, not from a religious moral perspective, but from more of a medical, psychological perspective, on the deleterious effects of porn on this coming generation. You know, guys that have grown up with pornography in a way that my generation didn't. But young people today, starting usually at 11 or 12, studies show, and the effects it's having on them now as they try to begin their sexual lives has been problematic. The objectification of people involved, I can certainly raise that as a moral issue. Violence in porn, I could raise as a moral issue. So I don't think that's just free of all moral concern. And I think there are medical, psychological issues attached to it as well that are problematic. Now, do you press that in a legal direction? So I might leave that to the lawyers and the politicians.
Instead of telling people what they need to hear, namely, that those who look at pornography or commit the sin of masturbation will be barred from heaven and sent to the fires of hell, unless they completely change their lives with a firm resolution never to commit the sin again, and receive forgiveness in the true faith through baptism or confession, Barron instead appealed to psychological studies about the harm such activities do to people in this life. In other words, his message is a natural one, not the message of the gospel. Barron was also asked about homosexuality. In his weak and misleading response, he falsely stated that practicing homosexuals, that is, people who engage in mortally sinful abominations against nature, are children of God.
So gay marriage.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much Googling you did on me before you got here, but I am gay married. You are in my house right now. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you this entire time. Actually, when I was doing research on you, I got to the gay marriage portion. I stopped reading because I don't know your full opinion, and I did not want to know before we sat down. So now I welcome you to tell me that, and whatever you say, I will continue this conversation in the spirit which I've done it so far.
Right, and I'd say several things. I said this one time, I was in New York with Cardinal Dolan actually, and we were talking to reporters, and I said, if the only thing a gay person hears from the Catholic Church is, you're intrinsically disordered, we got a very serious problem on our hands. If that's what the message has become, the message of the Church to a gay person should be, you are a beloved child of God who's been embraced by the mercy of Jesus Christ and invited to a full share in the divine life. You're a son of God.
No, that is a false doctrine. Only baptized Catholics in the state of grace are children of God. Barron also described homosexual behavior not as an abomination, but as inadequate, and in a certain way a compromise, and not something he would want to, quote, fully say, that's great, off you go. This is truly horrible, and it's uncharitable to the homosexual who is interviewing him. The charitable response is to tell him clearly the true nature of what he is involved with and the consequences of it.
In a certain way, I don't want to press it.
The church says no to what?
Says no to whatever that imperfection is, whatever that failure fully to integrate the meaning of sexuality. And see, in a certain way, I wouldn't want to press it further than that. That's the church's job, is to say no to what it perceives to be an inadequate, incomplete integration of the sexual act.
So then do you not see gay marriage as one of the ones that you said was so pressing earlier when you said that abortion would be one that is so pressing that it could shift, it could alter the course of a country or something? Do you not see gay marriage at that level of severity?
No, I do think it does have a negative impact on the wider society. I do think it is in a certain way, a compromising or undermining of an institution that's key to the health of the society.
Is this one of the things where I sense that your heart and your spiritual self maybe aren't quite matched up? Because I don't sense judgment from you sitting here. I really don't.
Yeah.
And I don't sense that you would try to legislate to reverse the decision. But I also sense that you can't fully say to me, well, it's okay.
Yeah, no, and that's probably right. The way you just put it there is probably right. I wouldn't want to fully just say, that's great, off you go.
Yeah.
At the same time, I wouldn't want to get onto a Crusaders tank and try to reverse that.
The homosexual also asked Barron if he would like to see the legalization of, quote, gay marriage overturned in the U.S. Barron actually replied by saying no. He also minimized the abomination that is homosexual behavior by comparing such sins to other sins in general. He also never once said that homosexual behavior is a mortal sin that leads people to hell, and he certainly didn't describe it as a sin that cries to heaven for vengeance.
So gay marriage was passed, what is it, a year and a half ago or so?
Yeah.
Almost 2 years now. I assume you felt it was the wrong decision by the court. Is that fair to say? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, no, I do, but I don't think I would want to press it much further. I think where we are right now in the States, I'll apply the Aquinas principle. I think it would probably cause much more problem and dissension and difficulty if we kept pressing it. I wouldn't want to get onto a Crusaders tank and try to reverse that. You're a son of God, called to eternal life. There's message one. Now, within that, are there further specifications to be made about anyone's moral life? I mean, my moral life needs a lot of work, trust me, you know? And I need to hear a lot of challenge from the church. But
We'll do confession at the
yeah,
end. I'll shut the
afterwards,
cameras. Yeah, no
afterwards
problem.
we'll have a good conversation about that.
Barron is so weak and demonic, especially on matters of salvation and sexual morality, that he would not want to see the gay, quote, marriage law reversed. Incredible. Matt mildly criticized Barron for some of his statements in the interview, but then concluded that it's, quote, not because he's a bad guy, end quote.
Bishop Barron is not a far-left lunatic, but he's hailed as a conservative neo-Catholic who is, you know, as far as I can tell, who's trying to do the right thing, but he also seems to be running out of answers now. He's painting himself in a corner. So you see, folks, it really becomes clear. Again, I don't mean to beat up on Bishop Barron. I'm glad that you know, he defends the unborn and says some really good things. And I just think he creates or he presents an indication of where this is all going, even for the good guys. We didn't go out and try to find some radical nut, you know, Mahoney or Weakland type to make a case here. We went for a guy who was conservative.
Are any human beings in hell? We don't know.
You listen to this poor fellow. Again, I'm more or less on his side here because he's not getting the Catholic teaching and he's kind of scratching his head going, what's up, Bish? What are you doing here? So what does he say, this homosexual man? He says, I don't sense judgment. No, neither do I. And he says, you know, I don't sense that you try to reverse gay marriage laws. Nope, neither do I. I sense that you're conflicted. And you know what? I do too. Bishop Barron seems very conflicted. Not because he's a bad guy, but because he's trying to again implement this whole new orientation of the church and the moral teachings of the church.
Think about that. According to Matt, Barron can embrace all of these horrible things and not be a bad guy. This is apostasy on Michael Matt's part. People need to realize that a man who says such a thing is an abomination under the control of Satan. Proverbs 17:15, quote, he who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous are both alike an abomination to the Lord, end quote. Isaiah 5:20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Matt describes the wicked apostate Barron who embraces notorious heresies and does not profess the true faith as one of the good guys, a conservative, and not a bad guy. That is justifying the wicked, and it shows that Matt is an abomination before God. Matt's message is, once again, a lie. It does not present the truth. Just like he lied when he falsely described Mother Angelica as a rad trad, he's lying again by teaching that a person can be a liberal exponent of the heretical Vatican II religion, such as Barron, who denies basic dogmas of the faith, and be good. Matt's inability to say that Barron is a bad guy shows once again that there's not an ounce of faith in him. Even though Matt says some true things, he is an empty and dark apostate used by the devil to keep people in the Vatican II counterchurch and to keep people reading the writings of heretical false traditionalists who present false positions. A man of such faithlessness is certainly not a person to be guiding traditional Catholics or determining which writings they should read. He is, however, just the kind of person the devil employs to present false positions to the world.
St. John Paul. I'm not questioning his personal holiness.
Yes, Barron is a bad guy. He is an apostate who accepts all the heresies of Vatican II, believes that hell may be empty, promotes the new false gospel of anti-Pope Francis, cannot tell people that clear mortal sins lead to hell, and will not even say that the law allowing, quote, gay marriage is an abomination that should be overturned. Michael Matt teaches the heresy that there are non-Catholic martyrs. In a video posted in 2017, Michael Matt played clips of the 21 so-called, quote, Coptic Christian martyrs. For those who believe this event was real and not staged, these were 21 Coptic, quote, Christians allegedly killed by, quote, ISIS for not denying Jesus Christ. According to news accounts, the 21 men were not Catholic. They were members of the schismatic and heretical Coptic Oriental, quote, Orthodox Church, a sect that denies the papacy and other Catholic dogmas. In fact, the Oriental, quote, Orthodox sect, to which they allegedly belonged, unlike many Eastern, quote, Orthodox sects, doesn't even accept the Council of Chalcedon and the dogma that Jesus Christ has two natures. So these 21 men, according to accounts, belonged to a sect that is heretical even on a fundamental point of Christology. According to Catholic teaching, such men are outside the body of Christ for denying the papacy and Catholic dogmas. They cannot be saved or be true martyrs, even if they shed blood in the name of Jesus Christ. This is a dogma. As Pope Eugene IV solemnly defined at the Council of Florence, quote, nobody can be saved, no matter how much he has given away in alms, and even if he has shed blood in the name of Christ, unless he has persevered in the bosom and unity of the Catholic Church, end quote. Pope Pelagius II taught the same. Those who are not willing to be at agreement in the Church of God cannot remain with God. Although given over to flames and fires they burn, or thrown to wild beasts, they lay down their lives. There will not be for them that crown of faith, but the punishment of faithlessness. Not a glorious result of religious virtue, but the ruin of despair. Such a one can be slain, he cannot be crowned. In Matt's video, he acknowledges that they were not Roman Catholics. Nevertheless, he presents and describes them as true martyrs who died for Jesus Christ and his church.
Now, these Christian Coptics that we just saw, they may not be cheerful, but they're clearly not terrified either. When we see in them the mark of the martyr, of the Christian martyr. But you can't help wondering, as you look at these Coptic Christians, how many Roman Catholics today would die like these men did? You know, what motivated them, really, regardless of the fact that they're Coptic Christians, what motivated them to die on that beach is what motivated all Catholic martyrs in history. Love. Love of Christ, love for the church.
This is blatant heresy. It's another example of how Michael Matt is not a Catholic, but a heretic who does not profess the true faith. This heresy that there are non-Catholic martyrs is one that Anti-Pope Francis teaches all the time. It's just one of the many facts which prove that Francis is not the Pope but an anti-Pope, since he's not even Catholic. It's interesting how the devil is using false traditionalist heretics such as Michael Matt to introduce this denial of Catholic dogma into so-called traditionalist circles. Michael Matt described the 7 years of Anti-Pope Benedict XVI's reign as, quote, glorious. As we document in our material based on research of 30 of his books and every official speech he gave as anti-pope, Benedict XVI was an astounding heretic. Indeed, one of the worst and most significant heretics in all of church history. Our video, The Heresies of Benedict XVI, is a must-see. It exposes some of his most revealing heresies. We could provide hundreds of examples of Benedict XVI's contradictions of Catholic teaching, but to name just a few, he fully embraced false ecumenism and religious indifferentism. He committed apostasy in synagogues and a mosque. He repeatedly praised false religions such as Islam.
Places of worship, like the splendid Al-Hussein bin Talal Mosque, named after the revered late king, stand out like jewels across the earth's surface. From the ancient to the modern, the magnificent to the humble, they all point to divine.
He taught that Protestantism is not even heresy. He agreed with the Lutherans on justification. He repeatedly attacked and denied the historical accuracy of Scripture. He taught that Protestants and schismatics have no obligation to accept the papacy and convert to Catholicism. He taught that there are ways to heaven besides Christianity. He taught that the Jewish reading of the Bible, according to which Jesus is not the Messiah and Son of God, is valid. He organized the worship of idols at Assisi. He engaged in condemned, mortally sinful false worship with heretics. He taught that Vatican II's blatant heresy, according to which Protestants and schismatics who reject the papacy are in the body of Christ, is binding. He denied Catholic teaching on the sacraments, and much more. He was a totally wicked apostate, a manifestly heretical non-Catholic anti-pope. Yet, concerning his heretical reign of terror, false ecumenism, and religious indifferentism, the apostate Michael Matt said this.
So I want to ask you, because you've been at this as long as I have, maybe longer, you know, a lot of us have been at it for a quarter century. And a lot of the little things that people now, just after the 7 years, this glorious 7 years of Benedict's reign, where we all felt like things were going back towards the right direction.
According to Michael Matt, anti-Pope Benedict XVI's reign was glorious. This proves again that Matt is a clueless apostate and a false teacher who does not care about the Catholic faith at all. And by means of such false conclusions, people remain in the counterchurch and on the road to hell. In 2014, a full year into Anti-Pope Francis's anti-papacy, and well after Francis had repeatedly displayed his malice and apostasy for all to see, Michael Matt said this about him.
Could be argued as an American equivalent to a Sochi or to a Palmaro. He said the same thing. You know, he said this Pope is not saying things that are in violation of doctrine, but they're saying things that are confusing the faithful throughout the whole world. Everyone is admitting this. Now, this is not to ascribe malice to Pope Francis. Maybe he's just still, struggling and trying to find his way.
So, Francis might not be malicious, but rather sincere and of goodwill, according to Matt. This is another example of how blind, apostate, and unwise Matt is, a faithless abomination who repeatedly justifies the wicked. Michael Matt is a mocker of the Catholic Church and the papacy. Matt's obstinate adherence to the apostate anti-Pope Francis, who condemns efforts to convert people to Catholicism, is of course contrary to various Catholic teachings. Yet Matt's statements frequently make explicit the contempt for the papal office that lurks within the false traditionalist position. In 2016, Matt released a video entitled The Lutheran Pope, Ecumeniacs in Sweden. Note the title, The Lutheran Pope. According to Matt, a Lutheran is the vicar of Christ and leading Christ's church. This is heretical nonsense, of course. Since Francis is a heretic who explicitly agrees with Martin Luther on justification, one could say that he's a Lutheran, but it's absurd and contrary to Catholic teaching to hold that such a man, a Lutheran, is the Pope. Heretics are outside the church and cannot be valid popes.
Io credo che le intenzioni di Martin Lutero non erano sbagliate e oggi luterani e cattolici, protestanti tutti, siamo d'accordo sulla dottrina della giustificazione. Su questo punto tanto importante lui non aveva sbagliato.
Even though Matt describes Francis as a Lutheran, he repeatedly calls him the Holy Father.
Our Holy Father, Pope Francis.
Matt thus recognizes his Lutheran, quote, Holy Father. Matt also holds that the Catholic Church has changed its teaching and thus defected. Here are just a few examples.
The Church is not only under assault, she has changed, she has moved to the left so significantly that she is receiving the stamp of approval from the Hollywood left. What do you say? Do I need to report this? Do you need me to break it down for you to see what's wrong with the Pope giving the green light to cohabitating, shacking up couples? Did you ever think it was going to get to this? And yet that's where we are. The fall of the Catholic Church is happening right in front of our eyes. The only reason we have this chaos is because the Catholic Church has reneged on her own claim to be the sole means of salvation, the true church founded by Jesus Christ.
Matt's statements are heretical. The Catholic Church cannot change or renege on its teaching. To say otherwise is blasphemy. Matt's obstinate adherence to the demonstrably false position that the Vatican II sect is the Catholic Church and that the Vatican II anti-popes are true popes has led him into these kinds of heresies and blasphemies. Matt also frequently mocks the antics of his so-called pope, including his official teaching.
This media hound pope of ours who really is becoming something of a cartoonish caricature even of himself these days. He just can't seem to get enough of Francis. And perhaps the most appropriate reaction to today's ecumenical brouhaha in Sweden, one of the world's most secular nations, and by the way, thanks to trickle-down Lutheranism, perhaps the most important reaction or pertinent reaction came from a group of several hundred students laying around outside the cathedral there in Lund, some of them wearing papal hats, all of them drinking copious amounts of beer, and pretty much mocking the obvious media stunt that was going on inside. Somehow that seems quite appropriate.
This papacy is, quite simply, an ongoing joke. But it's a joke with some very serious implications.
Confucius say, banish all kinds of cruelty. What is this, poping by fortune cookie? When you have, I'm sorry, this is beginning to reach maniacal proportions. When you have someone that really is beginning to act like a maniac in the chair of St. Peter, and some of the things that he's saying, Chris, I mean, I don't know if you have a note there, you can give me your comment on this too, but what he said earlier in the week, and I don't have the quote in front of me, where he actually compares, in Matthew, he compares our Lord's divine commission to go out and baptize all nations in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Ghost. He compares this to jihad, the same sort of militant conquest that Islam is so famous for. I mean, what do we do with this? To me, this is the last straw. This is unprecedented. What in the world do we do with this guy?
Since he regards Francis as the Pope and even endorses writings which teach that Francis must be regarded as such, Matt is just mocking the papacy and his own false position in the process. The truth is that the Catholic Church is perfectly and perpetually immune from error and heresy. It cannot be made false to her spouse. It has never been contaminated, nor could it be. It is unable to be mistaken, Pius XI. And it is preserved from blemish in the holiness of her doctrine, Pius X. It cannot be subject to any failing health or dimming of the mind, Gregory XVI. The Vatican II sect is not the Catholic Church, but the end-times counter-church. Matt hasn't figured that out, no matter how completely obvious God has allowed it to become under anti-Pope Francis. Matt's false position on the Vatican II sect and his lack of belief in Catholic teaching on the papacy also moves him to blasphemously proclaim the, quote, fall of the Catholic Church, that the Catholic Church is changing its position, that the Catholic Church has been destroyed, etc.
This is part of the modern Church of Vatican II raising the white flag of surrender to the modern world, reneging on her claim, obviously, to be the one true church, outside of which there's no salvation. That's all gone now. I mean, this is crazy, Chris. You start putting it all in context. We've got free and easy annulments, maybe de facto Catholic divorce coming up. You've got atheists going to heaven. Protestants don't need to convert. He's got this. We started the monologue talking about the fact that now our Jewish brothers and sisters are on their own. Fend for yourself, folks. You don't need the Catholic Church. You don't need Christ. You don't need to be under the Roman Pontiff. What's going on, Chris? How much more ridiculous can this come? Can this go? And we continue to call it Catholic. This isn't the Catholic Church anymore. What is it? Because now we have massive contradictions between what the Church taught a few years ago and what the Church is teaching now. And the Church cannot contradict herself. One of them has to be wrong because they're in direct contradiction with each other, old Church versus new. When the world's supreme moral authority on earth, the mighty Catholic Church, is sending signals of surrender like this, is folding up like a cheap tent in a tornado.
And to say, well, we have to follow our beliefs and so forth, I think we're losing that because now the church is changing her position gradually on things like gay marriage and things like, divorce and remarriage and so forth.
Such expressions contradict the Church's teaching on the papacy and indefectibility. This is what happens to people who obstinately reject the true position that the Vatican II claimants to the papacy are anti-popes. Matt also sometimes uses provocative headlines and titles that are geared to generate hype and serve as clickbait, but they are heretical and sacrifice Catholic truth. For instance, he released a video with the title in capital letters, Pope Soros. Such a title is sure to generate interest, but it is of course totally inaccurate and inconsistent with Catholic principles, for George Soros is not the Pope, nor could he be, even by Matt's own heretical standards. However, as we've shown, fidelity to Catholic truth and doing God's will is not Matt's priority. Rather, maintaining his false traditionalist enterprise and his position as an influential false traditionalist commentator and publisher is his priority. The predicament of false traditionalists such as Matt, who are still pretending that Francis is a valid pope, has become so absurd that Matt published the following statement by his fellow false traditionalist heretic Chris Ferrara. In reference to the heretical teaching in Francis's Amoris Laetitia, Ferrara stated this, quote, "This is a mockery of the magisterium and should be treated as such, with mockery, derision, and calls for rejection by the entire church," end quote. So just think about this for a moment. Michael Matt, a layman, publishes the article of another layman from Virginia. Together they reject the official teaching of their so-called pope, that is, the Lutheran, quote, pope, a teaching which their so-called pope has proclaimed and officially sent to the entire church. Together they say that the entire church should follow them in rejecting what their, quote, pope has sent and taught to the entire church. Alas, how many refuse, as a result of bad will, to embrace the true position, no matter how obvious it has become. Michael Matt doesn't blame a man for ceasing to be Catholic. Michael Matt recently had a public argument with two members of the Vatican II sect named Dale Alquist and Steve Moore. Alquist and Moore were defending Anti-Pope Francis's new heretical teaching in Amoris Laetitia, that people who are living in an invalid, quote, marriage or an adulterous situation may receive, quote, communion. Matt was criticizing it. To get an idea of the kind of heresy Matt's opponents were promoting, here's a clip from Dale Alquist. Alquist, a horrible heretic who at one time had his own show on EWTN, described it as, quote, crazy that a woman living as if she is married with a man who is already married, that is, in a clear state of mortal sin, would not be allowed to receive, quote, communion.
I'll tell you a story of a woman I know very well. Catholic convert, married to a man who was previously married. She wants to become Catholic. She has become Catholic. She's received in the church, but she cannot receive communion. Now, it's absolutely no fault of her own that she's married to a man who cannot get an annulment. It just doesn't make any sense that there cannot be some provision for her. But there isn't. She was told she has to divorce her husband in order to receive communion. That's crazy. I'm sorry. That's crazy.
The other man, Moore, was teaching a similarly heretical position.
Our church started out in the early years in its teaching on human sexuality very unmerciful. I mean, you can see that in the writings of St. Ambrose, St. Augustine.
Here's what Michael Matt said about Moore.
Again, I don't blame him. He's just gradually ceasing to be Catholic. That's just the way it is, and that's the way it is with millions of Catholics now.
Did you get that?
Again, I don't blame him. He's just gradually ceasing to be Catholic.
Matt says that he does not blame a man for, quote, gradually ceasing to be Catholic. Matt is thus directly excusing heresy, apostasy, and mortal sin. He is justifying the wicked. It's a sin, and contrary to the Catholic faith, to say that you don't blame a man for ceasing to be Catholic. It's another example of how Matt is, sadly, not a Catholic. The statements of the aforementioned individuals also demonstrate once again why it's necessary to reject Francis as an anti-pope who holds no authority, because multitudes of people under him, like the heretics Alquist and Moore, will adopt the heretical false teaching he presents to the world if they believe that he holds authority over the church. They are not all going to look up Michael Matt or a lawyer from Virginia to figure out when they need to, quote, resist or reject the official teachings emanating from their so-called pope. Multitudes will follow Francis's false gospel to their damnation.
And this pope is trying to use the truth to be merciful.
Thus, by obstinately telling the world that Francis is the pope, people like Matt contribute to the damnation of those who follow Francis's false gospel to perdition. In other words, they fail to warn their fellow man in the manner that he needs to be warned. That is, that Francis is a man who holds no authority, who should not be given any respect in regard to the church at all. In a video, Michael Matt also quoted a portion of Pope Paul IV's 1559 bull Cum Ex Apostolatus. For those who don't know, this bull is about how a man who appears to have deviated from the Catholic faith or fallen into some heresy prior to the papal election cannot be validly elected pope. The election of a heretic to the papacy, therefore, is absolutely invalid. In making reference to the bull, Matt selectively quoted it. False traditionalists do this kind of thing frequently. Watch how Matt only quotes the part of the bull where Pope Paul IV says that a pope may be contradicted if he deviates from the faith.
Pope Paul IV tells us we are right to resist the Pope whenever he deviates from the faith. He says, quote, "The Roman pontiff, who is the representative upon earth of our Lord God Jesus Christ, who holds the fullness of power over peoples and kingdoms, who may judge all and be judged by none in this world, may nonetheless be contradicted if he be found to have deviated from the faith." End quote. Pope Francis, without a doubt, is deviating from the faith.
Matt doesn't tell his listeners what the bull was about and what Pope Paul IV goes on to declare in it, namely, that a man who has deviated from the faith or fallen into some heresy prior to the papal election cannot be validly elected pope, and that such a person, even if elected by all the cardinals and accepted as the pope by all, is automatically deprived of office without the need for any further declaration. Pope Paul IV teaches that such a man is not a validly elected pope, and that he can be absolutely rejected by the faithful. He declares that anyone, quote, shall be permitted at any time to withdraw with impunity from obedience and devotion to those thus promoted or elevated, and to avoid them as warlocks, heathens, publicans, and heresiarchs, end quote. This is just one of many examples that could be given of how false traditionalist heretics such as Matt hide the truth and distort key facts, with the result that their audience remains in heretical and false positions. It's also interesting that Pope Paul IV even said that he issued this bull, which declares that the election of a man who has deviated from the faith or fallen into heresy is null, void, and worthless, to combat the arrival of the abomination of desolation in the holy place, an indication that the end times prophecies would be connected to anti-popes in the temple of God, which is exactly what we've seen in the Vatican II apostasy. Further, the teaching that a pope cannot be judged, which Paul IV mentions, does not of course contradict the true position that the Vatican II claimants to the papacy are to be rejected as heretical antipopes. It confirms it. The teaching that a pope cannot be judged means that a valid pope cannot be subjected to a canonical trial, and that a valid pope cannot be deposed. A man who is a heretic, on the other hand, is by definition outside the Catholic Church and therefore cannot acquire or retain the papal office. He is deprived of any office in the Church automatically, without any further declaration, as Paul IV explicitly says, by the very fact that he deviated from the faith. It is the false traditionalists who deny the Church's teaching that a pope cannot be judged, because their position is that a so-called pope, for instance, quote, Pope Francis, who explicitly says that Martin Luther was not wrong on justification, must either be tried for heresy, which some of them actually say, and that is condemned, or must be declared/judged to be a heretic and to have lost his office by some of his inferiors or council. All of that is schismatic nonsense that contradicts the truth that a valid Catholic pope cannot be judged or deposed, which is why a heretic who claims to be the pope is recognized as not having the papal office without any declaration, as Paul IV and the Church teach. Even though this is not hard to understand, false traditionalists have for years duped and misled their audiences on this matter when it is their false position that contradicts the Catholic truth, that a valid Catholic pope cannot be judged. It should also be noted that a Catholic does not need this bull of Pope Paul IV to prove that the Vatican II claimants to the papacy are antipopes. That fact is proven by the defined dogma that heretics are outside the Catholic Church. The Church officially teaches that the offense of heresy expels one from the body of the Church by its very own nature. The Vatican II claimants to the papacy are and have been manifest heretics. They are therefore outside the Church, and someone who is outside the Church cannot, of course, be the visible head of it. Indeed, the Church teaches that it's absurd to imagine that one who is outside can command in the Church. Thus, a heretic, for instance, someone who agrees with Martin Luther on justification and says that it's illicit to convert people to Catholicism, cannot be a valid pope. The resistance of Michael Matt and similar individuals is false. We could bring forward many other facts that further refute and expose Michael Matt, but we've proven that he is a wicked heretic and a false teacher. He doesn't have the Catholic faith, he rejects the Catholic faith, he denies God, he considers notorious heretics and idolaters to be saints, and he repeatedly justifies the wicked. He's a false teacher and he's on the road to damnation without any doubt. Many people in the false traditionalist movement think that it's good enough to criticize the novelties coming out of the Vatican II sect. No, it's not. You can't be a Catholic and profess communion with heretics, consider idolaters and the proponents of false ecumenism to be saints, call notorious heretics good, hold that the Church teaches false doctrines and contradicts itself, or deny Catholic teaching on salvation. To be saved, you must believe and maintain the Catholic faith whole and undefiled. The false resistance does not do that. When explaining why he doesn't reject Francis as an antipope, Matt says that Francis is not going to cause him to leave his church.
And we can't desert the Church. It's not that easy just to declare that it's an anti-pope or whatever and desert the Church. Run off and hide somewhere. Start our own little church. Listen, I'm not going to go start my own church. I'm not going anywhere. Francis is not going to chase me out of my own church.
That's because Matt doesn't have any idea what the Catholic Church is, and this really cuts to a fundamental difference between the two positions. Yes, we have two totally different views of what the Catholic Church is. This is a key point to understand. Matt and false traditionalists like him define the Catholic Church by buildings and robes. According to them, whoever is officiating in the building that the Catholic Church owns is a representative of the Church, even if that person promotes a false religion, doesn't profess the true faith, blatantly denies dogmas, agrees with Luther on justification, or preaches anything whatsoever while claiming to be Catholic. But that's a false doctrine and actually a false Christ. It causes them to subordinate the faith of Jesus Christ to a physical structure, with the result that they have united themselves to a non-Catholic and apostate club that has taken up residence in what were Catholic buildings. That's why they are now constantly mocking, rejecting, and condemning the non-Catholic theology emanating from that non-Catholic club, which they have wrongly identified as the Catholic Church. True Catholics, on the other hand, know that the Catholic Church is not defined by buildings and robes. It is rather comprised of those who have the true faith, profess the true faith, and don't dissent from any of her teachings, whether or not they are in buildings or robes, and even when the buildings are taken over by those promoting a false religion, exactly as it is prophesied to happen. This truth is found in Scripture's teaching that you, the true faithful, are the temple of the living God, which we see in numerous books of the New Testament. The true believers are the temple/church of the living God. And no, contrary to what certain clueless false traditionalists assert, this is not a Protestant idea. This is God's teaching in Scripture, and it is reaffirmed in the magisterial teaching of the Church, which declares that only those who profess the true faith are to be considered in the Church, and that all those who depart in even the least way from the doctrine proposed by the authentic magisterium are to be considered as having no part of Catholic communion and as banished from the Church. This is what the Church has always taught. Since only those who profess the true faith are to be considered members of the Catholic Church, all those who obstinately consider Francis to be the Pope hold that he professes the true faith, and that is a horrible denial of the Catholic faith. The Vatican II antipopes don't profess the true faith. They profess a false religion of religious indifferentism, false ecumenism, and notorious heresies. To say that Francis or the other Vatican II antipopes have professed the true faith in the face of the facts is simply to deny Christ and apostatize, as we showed in our video, Accepting Francis equals apostasy. It is to conflate a false religion with the true faith. It is to hold that multitudes of pro-abortion, pro-LGBTQ, and other apostates in the Novus Ordo sect are Catholics who profess the true faith. It is to hold that one can remain Catholic and, quote, profess the true faith while preaching that gays can be, quote, married, that abortion is fine, that Luther was right on justification, or any heresy whatsoever, For if Francis is not a heretic but a member of the Church who professes the true faith, despite teaching notorious heresies on various topics for years, then a person who claims to be Catholic can embrace and preach anything whatsoever without becoming a heretic, without ceasing to be a member of the Church, and without ceasing to profess the true faith. That is a horrible and demonic heresy, but it is the position of all those who obstinately consider Francis to be the Pope. They hold that there is no obligation to adhere to Catholic teaching to be in the Catholic Church, and that is a heresy. Further, in the apostolic period when the Church was newborn and beginning to grow, it did not possess many physical structures. There were house churches, and the Church was visible not in grand physical buildings, but in the true believers, the true Catholics, as it always essentially is. Eventually, the Church built many physical structures, including the Temple of God in Rome over St. Peter's grave, St. Peter's Basilica, where the apocalyptic prophecies about Rome's fall from the faith have been fulfilled with stunning precision in our day. But in the last days, all of those physical structures are given to the beast and to the whore of Babylon, in accord with apocalyptic prophecy, in punishment for the bad will and sins of men. As a result, the Church has ended up as she began, that is, lacking almost any physical structures, but retaining her essential characteristics in the true Catholic faithful who make up the visible remnant Church. Thus, in our own day, we can likewise say of true traditional Catholics who reject the counter-church, "You are the temple of the living God." The true temple of God, the true Catholic Church, is visible where the true Catholics are, and you are listening to one right now. So no, you are not staying with the Catholic Church by staying with a notorious heretic who preaches religious indifferentism, says that Luther was not mistaken on justification, holds that adulterers may receive, quote, communion, teaches that Protestants and schismatics are in the body of Christ, declares it illicit to convert people, teaches that atheists go to heaven, preaches a blatantly false gospel, and much more. You are staying with a building and uniting yourself to a false church, indeed the end times whore of Babylon, the spiritual component of the beast. Most of the differences between Sedevacantists and non-Sedevacantists come down to this issue, that is, to two different views of what the Catholic Church is. The non-Sedevacantist view is false, since they deny in reality the requirement to profess the true faith to be in the Catholic Church, and heretically define the Catholic Church by buildings and robes. They maintain that notorious heretics such as Blaise Supich and Timothy Dolan and Walter Casper represent the Church. They believe that to be, quote, with the Church, you must be united to such notorious apostates, because, after all, they are officiating in the buildings and wearing the robes, even though they preach and embrace a false religion. What utter heretical folly and stupidity! And it all results from their faithlessness and bad will, their false Christ which subordinates the necessity of professing the true faith of Jesus Christ to buildings and robes. And if you want further proof that we are correct, that the, quote, church to which Michael Matt clings, the, quote, church that Matt says Francis will not chase him out of, is not the Catholic Church but a non-Catholic sect, we offer you the words of Michael Matt himself.
I mean, this is crazy, Chris. You start putting it all in context. We've got free and easy annulments, maybe de facto Catholic divorce coming up. You've got atheists going to heaven. Protestants don't need to convert. He's got this. We started the monologue talking about the fact that now our Jewish brothers and sisters are on their own. You fend for yourself, folks. You don't need the Catholic Church. You don't need Christ. You don't need to be under the Roman Pontiff. What is going on, Chris? How much more ridiculous can this come? Can this go? And we continue to call it Catholic. This isn't the Catholic Church anymore. What is it?
Let's hear those statements again.
I'm not going anywhere. Francis is not going to chase me out of my own church. This isn't the Catholic Church anymore. What is it?
As his own words prove, he is in a non-Catholic sect. People like him have united themselves to a heretical non-Catholic sect and confused it with the Catholic Church because they faithlessly define the Church by buildings and reject the requirement to profess the true faith. And all of the frustration and consternation they experience when confronted by the heresies and chaos of their non-Catholic sect is connected to their heretical mistake.
The only reason we have this chaos is because the Catholic Church has reneged on her own claim to be the sole means of salvation, the true church founded by Jesus Christ.
No, the Catholic Church has not reneged on its teaching, nor could it. You have simply confused a non-Catholic sect with the Catholic Church because you heretically define the Catholic Church by buildings and deny that one must actually profess the true faith to be in the Catholic Church. Matt also says that whatever label you give Francis, it makes no difference.
Look, if we were to come out tonight, if I were to come out here and say, okay, we got a very important announcement, ladies and gentlemen, breaking news, Pope Francis is not the Pope, and the chair of Peter is empty. That's my opinion. But what does that do? What does that change in terms of what we have to do? Does that mean if we made that proclamation that Holy Mother Church is no longer in danger of being violated and being taken over by vile people who are trying to make her a tool of the United Nations and the New World Order? No. Quite frankly, whether he's an anti-pope or just a really, really terrible pope, which is what I believe, trying to destroy the church even, nothing changes for us by getting the right label on him.
This is ridiculous and absurd. First, his statement means that whether someone is a true pope is meaningless. That is obviously false. It denies Catholic teaching on the papacy. Second, there are many practical ramifications that flow from whether you consider him to be a valid pope. If he's considered to be the pope, even though not everything a true pope says is infallible, he would have to be given true obedience, and his official teaching would have to be heeded. They don't do any of that because they deny Catholic teaching on the papacy. Further, whether one considers the Vatican II claimants to the papacy to be true popes often directly impacts one's conclusion on the validity and safety of the new sacramental rites, and much more. Third, recognizing that he's an anti-pope and that the Vatican II sect is not Catholic directly impacts one's presentation of the faith to non-Catholics. People who adhere to the Vatican II anti-popes cannot consistently present the Catholic faith to non-Catholics, but true Catholics can. There are many direct, practical ramifications of what position you take on this, but the most important factor is one that's often overlooked. It is this: a person's relationship with God is rooted in the integrity of what's going on in his or her soul. If a person harbors a contradiction in his or her mind and heart, obstinately believing that a notorious denier of the Christian faith, such as Francis, is in Christ's church, contrary to the church's teaching, that affects and indeed taints one's entire relationship with God. It results in insincerity and inconsistency at the person's core, and that impacts the person at every moment of every day. It influences how that person looks at everything and corrupts all of that person's dealings with God. To please God, you must worship him in spirit and in truth, John 4:24. To interiorly cling to a contradiction, such as that the unbeliever Francis is the head of the believers, is to impair that worship at its very foundation. That's why the truth always matters, even if it doesn't change your schedule on a particular day. But a faithless heretic such as Matt wouldn't understand that. Also, don't be deceived by the apparent openness of Matt and similar false traditionalists. In public, they like to come across as if they are so open and accepting and tolerant of alternative views and other voices, and that they're all about unity. No, the truth is that they are only tolerant of alternative views and voices if those views and voices don't threaten their status and their false traditionalist enterprises. If they feel that someone or something represents a competing view, which, if adopted, would lead people to reject or look negatively upon their position, they have no tolerance for that.
And for these men to be criticized by the little stains running around now pretending to be Catholic, I'm sorry, charity fails sometimes in trying to be patient with these people.
You say to Vacanti, you guys are good guys, and I don't want to start a fight with you. But you can either get on board with this or you can simply get out of the way.
As we can see, he and people like him want to be the ones who provide the conclusions on the current situation, when, as this video has proven, they are not true Catholics but heretics, their position is false, and they have neither faith nor true charity. Some people who lack faith and love of God might also consider this assessment of Matt and similar false traditionalists to be too harsh. No, it's not. When people present themselves as teachers of the faith, as Matt does, they have an obligation to put out what is consistent with God's revelation and the Church's teaching. Otherwise, they shouldn't be involved with trying to direct people on these matters. The issues are too serious. Matt hasn't just made some innocent mistakes. Even though he has informed many that there are serious problems with the Vatican II sect and promoted some good things, he has obstinately and clearly rejected the truth and misled people with false conclusions for almost 20 years, and probably much longer. He is of bad will. The consequences of heresies on these matters could not be higher. God casts those who deny his faith into unquenchable fire, Matthew 3:12, a furnace of fire, Matthew 13:50, and a lake burning with fire and sulfur, Apocalypse 21:8. That's what God does to people who don't adhere to his truth and do his will. These are the most important matters, and it's paramount that one only puts out the truth. If a person is unable to do that as a result of human respect or for some other reason, then that person has no business trying to direct people on these matters. Michael Matt is a prime example of the people described in Apocalypse 17:8. As our material explains, the Apocalypse tells us that the beast that was, that is, pagan Rome or the pagan Roman Empire, and is not, that is, which ceased to be under Christian Europe, returns in the last days in a new form. The primary prophecy in the apocalypse concerning the end times beast is that Rome will lose the faith and become pagan again. This was also prophesied at La Salette. Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. This apocalyptic prophecy that Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the beast and the Antichrist is not something that's going to happen. It has happened. We are living through it. The political dimension of the end times beast is the godless European Union. The spiritual component of the beast is the Vatican II counterchurch. This is the new version of the pagan Roman Empire. Apocalypse 17:8 says, quote, "And the dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world shall wonder to see the beast, because it was, and is not, and is to come." End quote. As we have discussed elsewhere, the word here for wonder signifies shock, astonishment, amazement, or disturbed confusion at the beast and what it is doing. Now, the beast equals pagan Rome. The beast that was the pagan Roman Empire. The beast is not during Christian Europe, which replaced the pagan Roman Empire. The angel is referring to the time just before the end times beast rises. That's why he says that the beast was and is not. He's referring to the time when Christian Europe still existed and was in its final days. He describes this time as when 5 of the 7 kings associated with the 7 mountains, that is Rome, are fallen. These 7 kings associated with the 7 mountains are the 7 kings of the Vatican city-state. The angel says that the beast is about to rise again when 5 of those kings are fallen, and that's exactly what happened. The 6th king of the Vatican city-state, when 5 were fallen, was Anti-Pope John Paul II. That's when the beast, pagan Rome, truly rose again in its full form both politically and spiritually. It rose politically when 5 were fallen during the reign of Anti-Pope John Paul II, because the European Union was formed during the reign of Anti-Pope John Paul II. It rose spiritually when 5 were fallen, because Anti-Pope John Paul II was a pagan Roman king who claimed to be Lord and God, as our material proves, and introduced the direct worship of false gods into Europe, just as pagan Roman emperors did. That's why the beast truly came back, it truly rose, when 5 were fallen. In fact, it's very interesting to note that one of the most famous monuments in the beast that was, in the pagan Roman Empire, was the Ara Pacis, which means the altar of peace. This was a pagan altar on which idolatry was conducted, dedicated to the name peace. And what do we see in the Vatican II counterchurch, the new version of the beast? The most famous, or rather notorious, event through which paganism and idolatry was introduced and conducted was the Assisi prayer meeting, which was the World Day of Prayer for peace. In fact, at the very altar where the various false religions conducted their idolatrous worship at Assisi, the word peace was written in various languages. That's not an accident. Assisi is the new Ara Pacis. It's the pagan altar of peace in the new version of the beast, and it was introduced by Anti-Pope John Paul II. Assisi was also foretold in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, as our material covers. So, the beast that was and is not has returned. Paganism and the promotion of false religions overtook the city of Rome, forming the godless European Union Empire and the Whore of Babylon in the Vatican II counterchurch. This is what the prophecy is about. This is also why we now see the veneration of the images of the deceased pagan Roman kings who embraced idolatry, which corresponds to how deceased pagan Roman kings were venerated in the pagan Roman Empire. We also see that, in this new version of the pagan Roman Empire, the veneration of those deceased pagan Roman kings, such as Anti-Pope John XXIII and Anti-Pope John Paul II, becomes the instrument through which people are connected to idolatry and mortal sin, just as people were implicated in mortal sin and a denial of the faith by venerating the image of the pagan Roman emperor in the beast that was, the pagan Roman Empire. And of course, the use of Catholic images and the veneration of true Catholic saints is not evil or wrong. What is evil, rather, and implicates people in mortal sin is the acceptance of the false non-Catholic saints of the Vatican II counterchurch, who were unbelievers and idolaters. The Apocalypse mentions the veneration given to the image because during this great apostasy, during this apocalyptic deception, the beast and the Whore of Babylon overtake the city of Rome and install anti-popes there. False canonizations of idolaters and heretics result, and become a primary means through which multitudes are forced to approve as sanctified and holy lives that were characterized by heresy, mortal sins, and the acceptance of false gods. And the most significant of these images is that of Antipope John Paul II, the one who was wounded, which is why the making of the image of the Roman king who was wounded is singled out in the apocalyptic prophecies about the beast. Those prophecies refer to Antipope John Paul II and the veneration that people are giving him through his false, quote, canonization. Since Antipope John Paul II in fact claimed to be Lord and God by teaching that the Son of God became everyone in the Incarnation, as we have proven, and he was most notoriously connected to the worship of false gods, when people consider him to be a saint, with even a basic knowledge of what he promoted and stood for, they become directly implicated in idolatry and a rejection of the first commandment. They profess that one can be sanctified despite serving false gods, which is a denial of the true God and the first commandment. False traditionalists such as Matt lead others into this idolatry by venerating Antipope John Paul II and other pagan idolaters of the new version of the beast, such as Mother Teresa, as saints. When one understands that the beast equals the pagan Roman Empire, or simply pagan Rome, the striking fulfillment of the prophecy becomes quite clear. Think of the prophecy this way, understanding the beast to be pagan Rome. And the dwellers on earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, shall wonder to see pagan Rome, because it was, and is not, and is to come. Do you get it? St. John's prophecy is about Rome losing the faith and becoming the seat of the beast. The entire prophecy is about what has happened in Rome after Vatican II and what we are seeing right now. That transformation of Rome, of course, had ramifications for all of Europe and the world. When one understands that the prophecy is about Rome becoming pagan or losing the faith, one can see why it makes perfect sense that the people who are following Vatican II Rome, the beast that has risen there, are wondering. They are perplexed, astonished, and shocked to see Rome, which they expect to be Catholic, acting pagan.
The media doesn't help at all because the media is on the other side and uses the Pope's words to bash Catholic activists in America and all over the West. We have sometimes been shocked by things that we have heard.
That's the fulfillment of the prophecy. The entire post-Vatican II confusion and revolution is referred to in this verse. The loss of faith in the city of Rome, Rome's return to paganism, idolatry, and unbelief in accord with this prophecy, causes shock, confusion, and wonder among those who are not written in the book of life. It causes shock and confusion among those who lack the grace and faith to recognize that a counter-church, not the Catholic Church, is now in Rome and has taken control of the temple of God and the Church's physical structures.
Father Murray, what is this, in your estimation? And are good intentions enough to receive Holy Communion in the Catholic Church?
This is really a disaster, I'll say it straight out. It's a direct contradiction of what the Church has always taught. This is casting aside the message of the gospel. You're not allowed to commit adultery. That's the sixth commandment. You know, one thing that really puzzles me in this whole discussion is the resistance to describing things as they are. This is confusing.
Yeah. There's something very odd going on here. So there's some very, very strange confusion that is spreading out and out from this desire to regularize the irregular.
This is what we seem to be seeing, and it is very confusing to the people at home and the people watching all over the world, not just here in the United States or at this table.
Since they don't understand and can't see that what's occupying Rome and the Vatican now is not the Catholic Church but the end times beast, they are mystified and utterly perplexed to see paganism and apostasy and all manner of heresy coming from the place where they expect Catholicism to be taught. This is the prophesied wonder at the beast. In fact, consider this extremely revealing article by a, quote, conservative group in the Vatican II counterchurch. Entitled, "Just What Exactly is Happening at the Vatican?" It states, quote, "Everyone is asking, just what exactly is happening in the Catholic Church these days, and especially at the Vatican? It's not just our Catholic readers who are wondering this." Let me repeat that. It's not just our Catholic readers who are wondering this. It's also our many non-Catholic readers and pro-life and pro-family activists, end quote. Michael Matt and others in the Vatican II counterchurch are prime examples of this prophesied wonder and confusion among followers of the beast. In fact, the statements and overall reaction of Michael Matt correspond precisely to what's prophesied in Apocalypse 17:8.
What's happening? What are these men doing? It's very difficult to understand. I just read this for like the second or third time today, and I'm still having trouble believing it's not fake news. The Pope giving the green light to shacking up. I'm sorry to be sarcastic. I don't know what to do with this anymore. I honestly don't.
But friends, why? Why can't the Pope just issue a document that's just full-on orthodox right out of the gate? Why do I have to put my little Sherlock Holmes hat on to try to discover what the good stuff in the document is and then manfully try to reinsert that into the tapestry of Orthodox Catholic teaching? Where does this come from? Holy mackerel, what is this man doing? It's just unbelievable. What do you do with this? How much worse does it have to get? How much more absurd does it have to get? By honoring activists like Clooney, Gere, and Hayek, Pope Francis is undermining the Catholic faithful's effort to preserve the faith. Heck, what is going on? You know, and some of the things that he's saying, Chris, he actually compares, in Matthew, he compares our Lord's divine commission to go out and baptize all nations in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Ghost. He compares this to jihad, the same sort of militant conquest that Islam is so famous for. I mean, what do we do with this? To me, this is the last straw. This is unprecedented. What in the world do we do with this guy? What is going on anymore? I don't know what to make of this.
Keep in mind that this is the reaction of those who are not written in the book of life, of those who follow the beast and confuse it with the Catholic Church because they can't see, as a result of a lack of grace and faith, that the Vatican II claimants to the papacy are anti-popes, and that what's in Rome now is not the Catholic Church but the end times counter-church, the spiritual component of the end times beast. This beast and counter-church have taken over the temple of God and the church's physical structures. In fact, it's very interesting that both Michael Matt and another remnant contributor and false traditionalist named John Rao have made statements in which they unwittingly acknowledge that Rome has now returned to the paganism of the Roman Empire.
Because Rome right now, in terms of the Catholic Church, seems to be really faltering and losing her identity and going the way of the world, and to a great degree becoming just as corrupt as was pagan Rome in its own right 2,000 years ago.
Of course, they don't realize that this is the direct fulfillment of apocalyptic prophecy, as we explain, for they are still actually following the beast, the new version of the pagan Roman Empire, in its spiritual component, by clinging to its Vatican II antipopes and its false hierarchy. In this clip, John Rao discusses the abominable synod in Rome that was recently held by the Vatican II sect and the heretical ideas that were being promoted there. Pay careful attention to what he says.
This is the whole argument of the seeds of the Logos. You find something in the ancient world you can work with, you Christianize it. What's happened at this synod is the exact opposite. What they're doing is they're taking a world which still has remnants of Christian truth to it, and they're paganizing it. As though the bad aspects of the sinful pagan world are the seeds of the Logos, and what we have to do as Christians is to find reasons why all of that is good. So that rather than saying that love is something which is good that has to be understood in a Christian sense, they're taking pagan expressions of physical fallen love and then baptizing them and justifying them. And in doing so, another thing you can't see here on this film right now is that behind us there's what is referred to as the Ponte Rotto, the broken bridge. What they've done is they've broken the bridge. They've broken the bridge of the whole of the Christian teaching with its own past and with everything that was possibly good in the pagan, and they are now trying to rebuild that bridge in order to baptize what was evil in the pagan world and what's evil even more in the world around us.
The beast that was and is not has returned, and they are following it, they are united to it, and they confuse it with the Catholic Church. And then they wonder why this beast is promoting paganism and a false religion.
Heck, what is going on?
Il proselitismo è il veleno più forte contro il cammino ecumenico.
This is what we seem to be seeing, and it is very confusing to the people at home and the people watching all over the world, not just here in the United States or at this table.
I don't know what to do with this anymore. I honestly don't. What's happening? What are these men doing? It's very difficult to understand. You know, and some of the things that he's saying, Chris.
E oggi luterani e cattolici, protestanti, tutti siamo d'accordo sulla dottrina della giustificazione. Su questo punto tanto importante lui non aveva sbagliato.
There's something very odd going on here.
Again, I don't blame him. He's just gradually ceasing to be Catholic. Holy mackerel, what is this man doing? What do you do with this?
The only reason we have this chaos is because the Catholic Church has reneged.
This is confusing.
What's happened at this synod is the exact opposite. What they're doing is they're taking a world which still has remnants of Christian truth to it, and they're paganizing it.
I'm not going anywhere. Francis is not going to chase me out of my own church. This isn't the Catholic Church anymore. What is it? St. John Paul. St. John Paul. I'm not questioning his personal holiness.